Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for being here. Happy New Year. Hope everybody survived the torrential weather we had yesterday. I think that's got to be the most severe stuff I've seen in the 17 years I've lived here. Um, so you are here if you are an applicable large employer and are using Employee Navigator to process your ACA reporting. We're going to spend most of this morning going through actually how you process your forms in Employee Navigator and get those transmitted over to the IRS. This is if you've been in this webinar in the past. I think we've done this 5 or 6 years now. You know that this is, I like this to be a very interactive presentation. So please interrupt me while I'm going through particular slides and ask questions. And then, of course, you know, you can always reach out to me at the end of the webinar offline for any other specific questions you may have. So this is our roadmap for today. We're going to be briefly going over who files what and what the current deadlines are. A quick update on penalties and enforcement, and we'll spend the bulk of our time on a click-by-click through Employee Navigator tutorial and how to transmit stuff to the IRS. We will do our best to keep to our commitment of a 45-minute presentation with some time for questions at the end. This is a fairly meaty webinar. I think I've got 75 slides or so, but many of them we go through pretty quickly, so don't be concerned about the size of the content. So for who files what, I think pretty much everyone in the room, I took a look at the attendant list, are fully insured plans. So you're filing forms 1094C and 1095C. You are not completing part 3 of the 1095C. That's the section of the form where you provide information about who is actually covered on the medical plan. That information is completed if you're on a self-insured or a balance-funded plan. Just a reminder here that we do still have a California state insurance mandate. You are required to have health insurance if you're a resident of California. I talk about it because the Franchise Tax Board wants the 1095C data. However, if you are a fully insured employer, they get that information from the carrier, not from the employer. If you're self-insured or on a balance-funded medical plan, then the self-insured employer has the responsibility to get that information to the Franchise Tax Board. Please also make note that the Franchise Tax Board has set a deadline of getting forms to your employees of January 31st. This is in conflict with the federal deadline. So for several years now, the IRS has provided employers with a temporary extension to get forms to employees. That date has been March the 2nd historically. It's still that date for this tax year. But now that is a permanent deadline now for the IRS. So for the federal purpose, the 1095 deadline is now March the 2nd on a permanent basis. However, this does conflict with the state requirement of January 31st. So which date do you use? I have not yet seen, and I've talked to a couple of the risk attorneys who've told me that the Franchise Tax Board has not enforced this. They have, or at least they haven't seen it enforced yet. But all it takes is one employee to complain they didn't get their form, and the Franchise Tax Board may come calling. So I encourage everyone to get the filing done by the 31st if you can. If there's anything preventing you from doing that, you still have the federal deadline of March the 2nd. Also here on this slide, we have the transmission deadline. If you're filing paper, which nobody in this room is doing, but if you're still doing paper, you have until the 28th of February to get that information to the IRS. Transmission electronically, that deadline is March 31st. But since you're using Employee Navigator, it all gets done at the same time. Quick update on penalties. 2022 has gone up just a bit. The A penalty for failing to offer coverage is now 2,750 multiplied by the sum total of all your full-time employees less the first 30. The B penalty for failing to offer affordable coverage is now 4,120 multiplied by the number of employees that received a premium tax credit for coverage on Covered California. In practice, what this means for the A penalty, if you are a 75 full-time employee company, you're looking at a penalty of $123,750. So as we've seen in years past and currently now, these penalties get very big very fast. On that note, I talked last year about a Treasury IG report that was issued that was highly critical of the IRS in enforcing the ACA mandates. They made it a point to call out that the IRS issued $17 billion in proposed penalties, but only collected $749 million and recommended increased enforcement efforts, excuse me, for those penalties. In addition to that, the Inflation Reduction Act allocated $80 billion in new funding to the IRS. Most of that's going towards enforcement efforts. You might have heard in the news recently that the new Republican Congress is going after that. They passed what's really a symbolic bill yesterday to claw back that funding. That's not going to go anywhere because it will never be passed in the Senate. So this funding will be in place. And lastly, every year the IRS publishes a priority guide, and this is a list of areas where the IRS wants to focus on in the coming tax year. And when I read this, I noted that item number 25 is ACA reporting. So all of this in combination just tells us that we need to continue to be very diligent about making sure that this reporting is done, it's done accurately, and it's done timely. In that vein, the IRS has also indicated that good faith relief has ended. In years past, if you had a compliance failure with regards to the ACA filing, you were able to at least demonstrate to the IRS an attempt to try to be compliant, and you were able to get relief from many of the penalties under that program. That is now gone. Also know that in addition to the penalties for failing to offer coverage and failing to offer affordable coverage, you can also be penalized for not doing the reporting and doing the reporting late. Those penalties are $280 per form. However, it's effectively a double penalty because the IRS assumes that if you fail to file a form with the IRS, you also fail to provide the form to the employee. And lastly, it's important to note that there is no statute of limitations for penalties related to the ACA. And the reason for this is because the IRS has deemed ACA filings not to be tax returns. So they're not tax returns, so they're not subject to the normal statute of limitations for assessments. So as a result of that, the things I always talk about every year remain critically important. Make sure you're doing your reporting timely and accurately. Work that's being done by third-party vendors must be audited before anything gets transmitted. Keep copies of everything locally so that you can defend yourself. And also make sure you keep copies of all of your plan information. You may need to prove that your plan was affordable and that coverage offers were made to specific employees. You're going to need to have that data. Okay, so in preparing to process your reporting with Employee Navigator, I always recommend some pre-reporting steps to make sure that when you go to process the information, you don't have any errors in your 1095s. And it's really a matter of making sure you've got really good, clean HR data in Employee Navigator, confirming that dates of hire and termination dates are in the system for employees, that employees have the correct ACA classifications, earnings information, if there's any changes there need to be updated. If you're using W-2 as your affordability safe harbor, you have to every single year update that W-2 information. Employee addresses are obviously important, and of course enrollments, so that the codes on the 1095s are correct. What I like to do in just reviewing this data is just to pull a really quick column-based report out of the report section of the site. You can choose any of the employee fields that you want to look at. Take a look at that information and just double check that you have all of your core HR data updated. You also want to make sure, if you are tracking any variable hour employees, that you are clearing any HR pending actions out of the ACA eligibility dashboard. To do that, you would click on this blue bar that says HR pending actions. It'll pull up, here's a closer shot of that. You'll click on this bar. It'll pull up a list of the employees that are in that list, and then you will simply go through and finalize each employee's eligibility status by clicking on these little blue dots, which have a name which escapes me at the moment. But you do want to make sure you have all that cleared out before you do anything further with regards to your ACA reporting. I think it's also a good idea to double check your FTE status as an applicable large employer. I know that in the pandemic years in 2020, I had a number of clients that had a pretty good substantial drop in full-time staff because of the pandemic, and it did affect their status as an applicable large employer. Now, the one thing I want to make note here, though, is Navigator has moved this tool. I don't know why they moved the tool. It used to appear in the ACA console menu, which is on the left side of the ACA screen. It is now buried in the reports section of the site, and it's all the way on the very bottom of that report screen on the right. It's the very last item in the audit reports. It's the exact same tool. It's just not very easily findable anymore. I don't think findable is a word, locatable. Anyway, it's there, check it out. If you have any concerns about whether you're still in ALE, this is the report that you want to run. You also want to just check to make sure that you're not going to have any affordability errors come up in your 1095s. To do that, you would go to the affordability calculator, choose your low-cost plan, and the system, when you hit refresh, will do a stress test using rate of pay safe harbor, and will throw up an error to let you know if you have any employees that are going to have affordability issues. This does not run W-2 safe harbor, and it does not run Fed poverty earnings safe harbor. It's only it only works for rate of pay safe harbor, so be aware of that. If you do end up with any employees that show up that have issues, you can click on this blue hyperlink. It'll give you the list of the employees, and at that point, then you'll need to diagnose what might be happening. It's typically an earnings issue, and in this example, $10.50 per hour is obviously pretty far away from minimum wage right now, and so if you update the employee's earnings, it likely clears that issue. You also want to make sure, and we will have done this for you, but just you want to double check to make sure that, that your low-cost plan has been tagged. Employee Navigator needs to know which of the plans you're offering is your low-cost plan, so it knows which plan to do the affordability calculations on. Again, we will have done this for you, but it's good for you just to double check that. You also want to double check you have the correct affordability safe harbor chosen. You may change your safe harbor year to year for some reason. You want to make sure you have the current one that you want to be using assigned to the correct group of people. Typically, your safe harbor is assigned to all of your full-time staff as a collective. However, you can assign different safe harbors to different classifications of employees. That assumes you have those classifications already built out in Employee Navigator. But again, for the most part, this will be one safe harbor assigned to one class of employee. And then your 1094C information, you just want to verify that the Part 1 employer information is still accurate. We will have populated this for you in advance in Employee Navigator, but just check to make sure we got everything correct. Check your tax ID number, the name of the company, the address. You do want to make sure that the employer name matches any other official tax filings. So if we have left off Inc. or have left off LLC, and that's part of your legal company name, you want to make sure that that's in here in Employee Navigator. You also just want to make sure on the 1094 that any of the qualifications are checked. If you're using qualifying offer method, you want to make sure that that is checked here. If you attended the coding, the 1095C coding webinar last week, you know that my personal preference is for the 2C enrollment code to appear with 1A for employees that have enrolled in coverage when you're using qualifying offer method. This checkbox here on this screen allows you to tell Navigator to do that for you. And then lastly, NELCO, the third-party entity that actually transmits to the IRS, is the one that charges the per form cost for the transmission. These are the current costs associated with that. I did note when I compared these to last year, they've gone down a little bit, which is not typical. So I double checked it, and I do believe these are the correct rates. One thing I do want to point out here is the state filing. I have that in red here on this screen. I talked previously about that the Franchise Tax Board wants 1095C data. However, if you are a fully insured employer, they get that information from the carrier. You are not required to transmit information to the state if you are a fully insured employer. This is going to come up again in a couple of other slides because Navigator throws up a warning about this, and there's also a very easy trap to get into when you're actually in the NELCO site and transmitting to the IRS, which we're going to look at in a minute. Okay, so if there are no questions about anything we've covered so far, we're going to get into actually how you audit and e-file with Employee Navigator.
Nothing's come through, Keith.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. So there are 4 steps. There are 4 steps in processing and transmitting your ACA reporting within Employee Navigator. Step 3, the auditing and previewing of the data, is where you're going to spend the vast majority of your time. The other steps are pretty quick and easy. We'll start here with step 1, verifying your plan assignments. How you get to this area is by going to the ACA tab along the top of the screen, and then you want to go to 1094, 1095 reporting, audit, and e-file, and click on the green bar that says verify plan assignments. All you're doing here is double checking the prep work that we just went through and make sure that the proper plan is tagged as the low cost plan. You can make edits here if you need to. And you also want to make sure, again, that your Part 1 employer information that goes on the 1094C is accurate. There's a hyperlink here on this screen that you can use to make any changes if you did not previously. And that's it for Part 1, or Step 1, you're done. Step 2 is auditing any errors in employee demographics. And here, Employee Navigator is really good about warning you if there are any issues with employee information, so you can correct those first it actually won't even let you process your ACA reports until you correct this information. If you have any errors here, they'll show up as red hyperlinks. And when you click on those hyperlinks, it'll give you a list of employees that have particular issues. The two primary issues that I see are either missing ACA classifications or missing address information. Remember, in Employee Navigator, you need both an ACA classification and a eligibility classification for your employees. It's the ACA classification that's the critical one that allows you to process your ACA reports. So you want to go in, correct that information, and then once that's done, you're done. Now, step 3, here's where we're going to spend most of our time this morning. So when you first go here, you're going to be faced with this screen and a green bar that says create a preview of your 1095C data. You want to make sure you're picking the correct reporting year, which will be 2022. Once you click on that green bar, Navigator will now process all of the data for the 1095s. Depending upon when you do this, it is sometimes quick and sometimes takes a while. Depends upon the traffic at the Navigator servers. If you're doing this close to the due date, it tends to be a little slower during those times. Once you've done that, the screen will then change to look like this. And you'll note here that there's a big red orange bar with a flag that says you've got some issues with employees with unaffordable offers or non-qualifying offers. We definitely want to address that because those are forms that have errors. However, before we do this, the first thing I like you to do is just verify that your 1094C is accurate. So now we're going to audit your 1094C transmittal form. When you click on the, I'll go back one slide here. When you click on that hyperlink that says View 1094s, you'll be faced with a screen that has this information on it. The screen won't look like this, but I've broken these graphics out so I could put them on a single slide. This is a long scrolling screen when you're actually in Navigator. You'll first be able to check that the company name and tax ID number are all correct. And then the questions that are asked on the first page of the 1094 will show here, is this the authoritative transmittal? How many forms are you transmitting? Are you part of a controlled group? Are you using qualifying offer method? You'll check to make sure all that information is what you want it to show. If you scroll further down on that screen, this is the most critical area. And if you attended the coding seminar last week, you know that I talk about this quite a bit. The second page of the paper 1094C, the very first column, asks you this question about whether you offered minimal essential coverage in each of the months of the tax year. This is the question from the IRS that is, did you meet your mandate as an applicable large employer to offer coverage to your full-time staff, yes or no? If you say no, and any of your full-time staff end up at Covered California, you are absolutely guaranteed to be penalized by the IRS. If this says no, when you're auditing your 1094, you need to take some steps to correct this. The way to correct this, the next step from this point is to click on each of these, and hopefully you don't have no's all the way across, but if you do, you click on the hyperlink for each of these no's, and it will pull up then a list of employees that the system thinks did not receive an offer of coverage. If this is an error, and for some reason there was an HR data error or the enrollment didn't get captured or whatever it is, and you know that the employee actually got an offer of coverage, they may even be enrolled in coverage, you would click the include button on this screen, and that will override, override the indication of no MEC offer for that particular employee. And then you simply go through however many employees are on that list and click include on however many of them you need to correct for that to change. When you're done doing that, the hope then is when you go back, and I'll go back a couple screens here, the hope is then when you go back to this screen that these no's have been changed to yes. And again, if you need help with this issue, when you're auditing your forms, please do reach out to me and I'll be happy to help you with that. Okay, so now you're done auditing your 1094C, and now we're going to start looking at the 1095Cs. But the first thing we need to do is look at two areas on this particular screen. So first, you'll see a blue bar that says Override 1095 form. If you click on that, it's going to give you a list of employees that are not receiving a 1095C form. Again, for reasons that the system believes that they were either not eligible or maybe they're a variable hour employee that is still being measured. If you believe that that's inaccurate and the employee actually is eligible and is on coverage or was offered coverage, you can override this by clicking the Generate Form box here, and then the system will force a 1095 for that particular employee or employees. So next we're going to look at the error box. So before you do anything else with your 1095s, you do want to make sure that you are checking and correcting these issues. This is Employee Navigator again, demonstrating to you that there is an issue with a number of your 1095s. So when you click on that orange box there, you will then receive a list of employees that have problems with their 1095s. And if you click on the hyperlink next to each of those names, you'll see the person's 1095C and the coding, and Navigator will put an orange box around the codes that it knows have a problem. And in this example, Navigator knows that there should normally be a line 16 safe harbor code or an enrollment code, but here it's missing, and it wants you to look at that. What you're going to do at this point is you're going to have to then go and do some of that HR diagnosis again to find out, well, why is nothing populating on line 16? I know this employee was enrolled in coverage. There should be a 2C there. You'll check your HR data in Employee Navigator. You'll likely find out that maybe the enrollment didn't get captured or something else happened where it's not recording. You'll go through that for each one of those employees where there is an issue until all those errors are cleared. I'm going to show you in a couple of slides how, if you go through this process and try to diagnose what happened with these forms and you can't fix it or can't find it, you can override the codes manually, and we'll look at that in a second. If you scroll down, so you're at this screen here, if you scroll down, you'll also be able to see this employee's affordability information. And then by further scrolling down, you'll see their plan information, whether they're enrolled or not. And then the system also gives you some core hire date and term date information. And sometimes by seeing that, it'll tell you that there's an issue with HR data. Okay, so then once you're done with that, you're back to this main screen. That orange box should now be gone. And so now you can audit your 1095 data. You do that by clicking the View 1095 hyperlink, and it will then show you this screen, which gives you a list of all the employees getting 1095s, and then this graphical representation of whether there was enrollment or not, or not enrollment for this employee for particular months. If you've attended this webinar in the past, you know that this is my least favorite screen in Employee Navigator. What I would really prefer they do here is not give me this blue E, but rather give me the actual codes in each one of the months for the employees, so I can quickly audit the codes to see if I can identify anything that sticks out to me. What Navigator instead forces you to do is they force you to look at each form individually. So to do that, you click the green view button to pull up each employee's form. And then I'm going to come back to this thing that I talked about the state filing. Employee Navigator will show you this warning when you're auditing the forms that says that state filing is required for this employee, which is technically correct. But again, remember that if you're fully insured, this really doesn't apply to you and you don't have to worry about it because the franchise tax board is going to get their information from the insurance carrier. So when you see this warning, don't be concerned about it if you're fully insured. So you'll see the employees 1095-C codes. If there are any issues or errors with the codes, again, Navigator puts up these orange boxes to show you that there are errors, and then you will diagnose again what may have happened, or you can simply override these codes manually. Now, if you didn't attend the webinar last week and you don't know the codes or don't remember what the codes mean, Navigator also gives you a legend, and if you click on the "What do the codes mean" hyperlink here, it'll give you a list of all the codes and their definitions. So back to this example, we know that 1H means no offer of coverage and 2C means there was enrollment. Both of those things can't be true, so there is obviously an issue here with this form. You can, if you want, simply override these codes. For example, if you know that this employee received an offer of coverage and was enrolled, you can simply override the 1H code. To do that, you click on the override hyperlink here, and it'll provide you with an opportunity to override that particular code. The system also allows you to now quickly override the cost of coverage, which shows up on line 15 if you either see that information is missing, or if the information is not correct, you can now override that. In the past, Navigator required you to update these cost data points by doing an Excel import that was cumbersome. This is a much better way of doing it. And once you have made corrections to anybody's forms, the system will now show those particular months with a blue shading. So when you're going through forms and you're coming across forms that have blue shading, that's an indication to you that you've made corrections to that particular form. And then you'll do this for all the employees. And to move through each of the forms, you'll simply click on the previous or next buttons to move to the next employee's form. So again, correct HR facts is really critical with this. You want to check to make sure your hire dates and term dates are all correct. Make sure earnings information is all updated. ACA classifications we know now is critical. If there have been any class changes, for example, if somebody went from part-time to full-time or the other way, you want to make sure you have those effective changes correctly noted in Navigator. Someone moving from part-time to full-time changes the codes on the 1095, and so the accurate dates that those changes happened are critical. And if you do make any core HR data changes in the system, you always want to make sure you regenerate your 1095s so that new information is captured. And again, you want to contact me if you have any specific questions. And many of you know that I'm happy to schedule one-on-one sessions with you in your particular Navigator site and work through any particular issues that you have. Okay, so if there's no questions about auditing your 1095s, we're now going to move to the e-transmission to the IRS. This is pretty straightforward. Once you're finished auditing your 1095s, the next thing you do is you click on this blue next button, and that moves you into step 4 of the process, which is your e-file step. Before you do that, though, if this is your very first time doing this with Employee Navigator, you first are going to have to establish your e-file account. And to do that, you would click on Manage e-file account, and let's see if I have a slide. I don't have a slide that shows the screen that you'll see, but if you have not established your credentials yet, you'll be faced with a screen that's going to ask you for some very, very basic information, a name, an email address, and that's really all you need. Once you enter that information, then you'll be able to transmit to the IRS. If you have trouble with that, call me and let me know. I know in some cases, we may need to turn on an HR permission within the back end of Navigator to allow you to do that if you're having trouble with that. If you've done this before, if you've used Navigator before for your transmission, all that information is already there. You're not going to have to do any changes. So once you do move into step 4, again, if you have any error issue, in this case specifically cost information on line 15 of the 1095s, Navigator will not permit you to transmit until you correct that information. However, and here's an example of what you would do. So you would pull up the employee's form and then click the this is an I need to change this screen where it says import on line 15, that now says override. So you'll be able to click the override hyperlink here and then input the cost information. And in this example, it wants you to give some cost information for the month of September. Once you do that, then that other error that prohibits you from e-transmitting should clear. Providing it does, you'll then get this screen with a green bar that says transmit data to the e-file provider. This is not transmitting to the IRS yet. This is simply moving the data out of Employee Navigator and into NELCO. And when you do that, you'll notice then that a new screen will open up on your browser after you click the, and I apologize for the poor quality of this graphic, but after you click the Enter e-file site, your browser will open up a new browser window, and then you are in now the NELCO site, and this is the transmission site to get everything to the IRS. Now, I want to pause here again and talk again about the state filing. NELCO is now set up to file federal and also file state where required. And it may default to checking the bundle in the left-hand column where it says federal and state e-filing. It'll often default to checking that bullet point. Again, if you are a fully insured group, you do not have to file with the state yourself. The carriers will take care of that. You want to make sure you uncheck the Fed plus state bundle and make sure you're only checking the federal e-file bundle. Pardon me for 1 second here. With the Fed e-file bundle, you get transmission to the IRS, you get recipient mail. They mail the paper forms to the employees, and they also provide a online retrieval if you have collected email addresses, and those addresses are being carried over into the NELCO site. So assuming that this is all then correct, you simply click the next button, and then you'll be faced with this screen. If you collected email addresses in Navigator, those will all be ported over. If you notice that any email addresses are missing, you can add those here. You'll then be faced with this screen here. NELCO allows you to preview your forms. You've already done that through the audit process in Navigator, so I don't think you need to do that here. You can also download a detailed report. I don't think you need to do that in this step. You'll be able to pull down all of your information at the end of this process, which I'm going to show you at the very end. So you really just want to click next here. and then you'll be faced with the payment screen. You'll enter credit card information on this screen here, and then once that's in, you'll save that information. And then once that's all there and saved, click Pay and Submit. And then ideally, you get this screen, congratulations, you have successfully filed your returns. At this point, you're not quite done yet. I want you to do a couple of last steps. And the first step is to click Return to your filing home. And by doing that, you come back to this initial screen in NELCO, and you'll see a tile to the far right entitled Form Filing History. Click on that tile, and it'll show you if you have used Navigator in years past, your prior years will show here. Make note, though, that Navigator only saves the last 3 years of filings. What I want you to do at this stage, though, is I want you to pull everything off of the NELCO site and save everything locally. So to do that, you'll click on the printer-looking icon next to your transmission confirmation. Once you do that, you'll be faced with a screen that has all of the employees' forms checked by default. You want that, so just click Next here. And then you'll be faced with this screen where you can pull down then all of the information and your forms, check all the boxes, and then once you do that, you'll be able to click on the download button and download all of your information. Save it locally. Save it in an area where it can be easily obtainable. I have had situations in the past where employers have had to defend themselves against ACA penalties and need to locate their past filings, and the person charged with that task saved it to a password protected folder. They're no longer working for you, and now you can't get the information. Don't do that. Make sure it's all very accessible. The last thing I want to talk about is you may get an email after you transmit that says you have what's called a TIN validation error. Now, what this means is that first and foremost, your transmission is still accepted, it's still with the IRS, it's still a valid transmission. You're just being told that there is a mismatch between employee names and social security numbers, and the government computers noted that, and they're telling you that there's a potential issue. This is not an official IRS notice of a problem, but you should go then and research which employees caused the issue, and then go check your HR data to make sure that there are no changes that should have been recorded. Maybe somebody got married and changed their name, whatever it may be. There is a report that's available in the NELCO site, which provides you with an Excel report to tell you which employees are causing these errors. I have a separate training on how to do that, but if you do get this email, just call me or send me a note and let me know, and then I'll walk you through what steps to correct that. There is additional information and resources. The IRS has a very full and detailed site with information for ALE employers. Employee Navigator still has really good videos on how to process your 1095s, and NELCO also has a very good video on how to file corrected 1095s and also how to fix those TIN validation error issues. And with that, I think we're pretty much, wow, I think we're right on exactly 45 minutes. We've set aside some time for questions, and so I'm happy to take any questions that we have. Sarah, do we have any questions lined up?
We had one that just came through, and I answered it with a typed answer, but somebody asked if we had the recording from last week available. And just so you all know, that is saved on our website. the recording as well as the accompanying slide deck. So I'm putting that website into the chat right now so you guys can access it that way. And we'll do the same thing with this recording. It'll be on the website for future reference.
Great, excellent. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, and we have a couple other questions here too.
Okay.
All right, so let's see. Last year, you assisted us with an employee import to Employee Navigator. Can you assist us with that again?
Yeah, excuse me. Yes, absolutely. So if you have any HR data amendments or changes to make that's more than just a couple of employees, it's more efficient to do that as a data import. This is particularly true if you're using W-2 Safe Harbor and need to get a lot of W-2 data into the system. So yes, contact us and we'll talk about what data needs to be imported, and we'll get that taken care of for you.
Sounds good. All right, next up, can you clarify due dates of transmission?
Yes, so the state of California wants you to have forms in employees' hands by January 31st. The IRS's deadline is March the 2nd. I'm giving you both dates. The official date for the form is March the 2nd because it's a federal form. However, the Franchise Tax Board has in their publications that they want forms in employees' hands by January 31st. You know, I haven't seen that enforced, but you know, the conservative Keith would advise you to try to get the forms done as quick as you can. But if for some reason it just can't happen by the 31st, I wouldn't be excessively concerned about it.
All right. Next up, if you need to update ACA class, do you do it in Employee Navigator or in the payroll system?
So yeah, I believe Jenny, you've got Paylocity. I have to go back and look at which direction that information travels between the payroll provider and Navigator. My instinct says to me that that would be added and updated in Navigator, but let me double check that, and I'm going to contact you after this is done, and I'll make sure you get that information.
All right, next, this one says, all of my employees are union employees. Do I still need to file these forms?
This is a great question. Thank you so much for asking that. I did not cover union employees in this presentation, but yes, if you have union employees, they do get 1095-Cs from you as the employer. However, because they are getting their offer of coverage from the union, from the multiple employer welfare plan, you as the hiring employer get to take credit for that offer of coverage from the union, providing that you are paying your contracted required amount into that plan. There is a special transition relief code that goes on the 1095 on line 16, which tells the IRS that this is a union employee that received their offer from the union. You do need to make sure that two things have happened though. All the union employees do have to be in Employee Navigator, and they have to be tagged as union employees so that that special coding on the 1095 is appearing. Contact me after the webinar for more specific questions about that, and if you need some help with looking at that to make sure that that's working correctly for your situation, let me know so we can check that for you. And looks like, I think that was it, Sarah?
That's all we got. Yep.
All right, very good. Okay, thanks again, everybody, for attending. Hope this was helpful. As Sarah indicated, we will have the full webinar distributed to you folks and also up on the website fairly soon. And again, Happy New Year, and we'll see you again soon.